You're terrified, you're exhausted, and the thought of taking the next step, the step you know you need to be taking in order to improve your life, feels almost impossible. But what if I told you that readiness is a lie? What if the most important things you'll ever do, the moments that will define your life, happen when you stop waiting to feel ready? I know this because I was once in this same situation, feeling that fear and exhaustion that held me back for so many years, even when my entire life depended on me taking the next step. But this isn't some story about becoming fearless. This is the realization of how I stopped letting fear dictate my actions, and how if you apply the lessons that I learned to your life, you can do the same. Ever since I was 16 years old, I had big dreams and ambitions of becoming an entrepreneur and being a millionaire by the time I was 21 years old. I remember when I started my first business back when I was 19 years old, and it was Forex day trading. You know, a very standard practice nowadays. Everybody wants to be a freaking trader. But, that was my first business, and I really thought at the time that I could really make it work. And, at first I was like, man, this is really exciting. It's new. I started something of my own, and I really felt like success was guaranteed. But over time, my business began to struggle. It wasn't some big cinematic explosion, it was more of a slow, quiet crumbling. My business, which I had wrapped my entire identity around, came to a stop. Profits were non existent, and as a matter of fact, I was actually losing money. And not too long after that, I had succumbed to my failure and given up. At that time, I didn't just feel stuck, I felt obliterated. That failure, made worse by the fact that I quit, morphed into this monstrous fear of failure that really held me down for years. The voice in my head became relentless. You're not good enough. You'll never get another shot like that. Everyone else is moving forward while you're still stuck. That fear was so potent that it caused me to get stuck in this endless cycle of analysis paralysis, where unless any idea I came up with was bulletproof, and I mean had no flaws, no gaps, I wouldn't pursue it. Except I learned very quickly that no plan ever is. Then came the exhaustion. At first, I thought it was just the emotional toll, still coping with the failure, but then it got worse. I could get 8, 9, 10 hours of sleep, and yet when I woke up, I felt like I hadn't slept at all. There was absolutely no motivation in me to do anything productive. Meanwhile, my savings were dwindling, the pressure to figure it out was crushing, my life depended on action, but my mind was screaming for inaction. The cost of staying still was financial ruin and my dreams to atrophy, but the fear of moving forward felt even bigger. I was trapped, which leads me to the turning point. You see, my turning point wasn't some lightning bolt of motivation. There was no sudden surge of energy. There was no magic moment where the fear just vanished. What changed everything was a single, unwelcome thought that managed to break through all the noise coming from my fear and insecurities. Nothing is going to change. No one is coming to save you. The perfect moment is never going to arrive. It was a moment that liberated me from my fears and insecurities. See, that entire time I'd been operating under the assumption that one day I'd feel ready, or that one day the fear would be gone, and that one day I'd have this massive spark of motivation that would get me back on that horse and go after my goals. But I realized in that moment that that was a losing strategy. You see, I learned in that moment that the goal shouldn't be to defeat fear, but rather to act in spite of it. That's when the phrase I'd heard before echoed in my mind. Do it scared, do it tired, but do it anyway. It was a clear recognition that progress isn't born from ideal conditions. It's often born from messy, imperfect, and often terrified action. So how do you actually do that? How do you move forward when every part of you resists it? I didn't have a grand plan. I just started with a few mental shifts that I was able to implement to start gaining momentum. First, I had to reframe fear as a compass. We're taught to view fear as a stop sign, to turn back and go the other way. But what if fear isn't a barrier, but a signal? I started seeing it as a giant flashing arrow that was pointing me directly towards the things I cared about the most. I mean, you're not afraid of the things that you're indifferent to. You're afraid of bombing the job interview because you want the job. You're afraid of getting your heart broken because you want to find love. And you're afraid of launching the business because you care so much about its success. So instead of seeing fear as an enemy, I started seeing it as a guide. There's a powerful quote that's often attributed to Franklin D. Roosevelt, and it says, "Courage is not the absence of fear, but rather the assessment that something else is more important than fear." By using discomfort as a compass, I could at least know that I was heading towards something meaningful. And you should too. Second, I had to shrink the action until it was no longer scary. You see, the idea of starting a 7-figure business is absolutely daunting. It's a long journey and a very difficult hill to climb. So instead of focusing on the goal, I shifted my attention to focusing on the small tasks that I can complete now to achieve my objectives later. My goal wasn't to launch a $1 million product in 30 days. It was to start journaling ideas. That's it. The next day, it was about journaling new ideas and picking the best ones. The day after, it was about coming up with a plan for the best idea I could come up with. This strategy works so well because it bypasses your brain's tendency to overthink. You're not committing to the scary outcome. You're just committing to the small, tiny, immediate physical movement. To me, action, no matter how small it was the antidote I needed to overcome my overthinking. And third, the hardest one I had to learn was to detach from the outcome and attach to the effort. As someone who would consider themselves a perfectionist, my self-worth was tied in my achievements. So my fear of failure was really my fear of being seen as a failure. So I had to change the definition of winning. Winning was no longer launching a $1 million product. Winning became coming up with an idea for a potential $1 million product. I let myself off the hook for the outcome because so much of the outcome is out of my control. The only thing I can control was my effort. By focusing only on the act itself, it took the pressure off. It didn't really matter if the idea was good or not. What mattered was that I honored my commitment to myself to act. I was telling myself, I am the kind of person who does the hard things even when I don't feel like it. And not too long after that, things began to shift. Writing down ideas for businesses led to me launching my YouTube channel. Launching my YouTube channel led me to scripting videos. And scripting videos led me to recording and posting those videos. Sure, I only had a few hundred views and a couple of subscribers on the channel. But something else was happening. With each small task, I became less afraid. I was building more resilience. I was proving to myself in real time that discomfort is temporary and it can be overcome. Now, of course, my life isn't some fear-free paradise. I still have days where I'm exhausted and I still have to face decisions that make me nervous. But the difference is that I no longer see those fears as a stop sign. I see them as part of the process. At this point, I have built an unshakable knowledge that my ability to act is not determined by my emotional state. So what's the one step you know you need to take? The one that makes your heart race and your palms sweat just thinking about it. I want you to share it in the comments below. Not for me, but for you. To name it is to claim power over it. Look, the greatest lie we tell ourselves is that we need to have confidence before we can have courage. But courage isn't about the absence of fear. It's about the willingness to act in spite of it. You don't need more motivation, you don't need a better plan, and you for sure don't need to wait until you feel less scared or less tired. All you need to do is just take the next, smallest possible step. So do it scared, do it tired, do it exhausted, or unsure, or unprepared. Acknowledge the fear, honor the exhaustion, and then do it anyway. Thanks for watching. If this resonated with you, please consider subscribing and joining our community of people who are choosing to act. And remember, you've got this.